You're listening to SoFloRadio.com.
Stuart Reed, attorney, mediator, and yoga instructor, here for the next hour to talk about law, mediation, and yoga. So let's drop into our breath and come to order. The show is now in session.
Okay, good morning, George. Good morning, Clotilde. Good morning, anybody who's watching us. And hello, George Harrison. Thanks for the beautiful song to bring us in. Give me love, give me peace on earth. And we're going to probably talk a little bit about that, peace and love, and how it fits into politics and values in politics. And yoga? How does yoga fit into all this? You're going to be maybe surprised that it fits right in very well. Clotilde I invited on the show today because we've been friends for a long time, and I know her as somebody with a very broad, open mind and who pays close attention to political issues. She's a historic preservation activist in Miami Beach, in California, I think other places as well. Was a radio show celebrity or host, both in Paris, France for many years. In fact, maybe later on I'll get up and share a picture of her and James Brown on our show.
I feel good.
I'm feeling
I have my comedy drum. Should I bring that down?
You already earned your keep with that.
Sorry.
Good one. So we're going to she also, when I in 2003 ran for the Miami Beach City Commission, she was very helpful, made phone calls for my campaign and went with me when I recorded.
I wish you'd won.
Well, thanks.
I mean, no, wouldn't have made a difference.
Well, I could have ran again, except I got married and moved.
Yeah.
So.
I think you probably made many right decisions, but I at the time I knew you would be very good for us.
And now I'm getting involved in the scene again, and I thought that I had learned my lesson, and you should keep a safe distance, as Jewish ethics, Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers, say, don't get too friendly with the government. Keep a safe distance. I think it's wise advice. But I think also there's one ethic of our fathers where they say where a man is needed, no offense to women, but I think they're talking about people who are stand-up guys and gals. When a man is needed and there are no men, strive to be a man. And I think that these are trying times now, and there's too much polarizing and anger and finger pointing. And I think there's another way that people can approach public issues and public discussions. But before we jump into that, Clotilde,
Yes.
Tell us about yourself.
You want to my astrological sign?
Yeah,
and
start at the beginning and
mother's maiden name.
go into great detail.
No, trust me, I hate talking about myself.
Spare no detail.
I don't know. Basically, I'm sort of I'm really a brilliant dilettante. Like, I don't focus on anything for a very long time. I never could have gotten a PhD in anything. I dropped out of college. I'm so glad I did.
But I read in the bio you sent to me, you dropped out of architecture school and then you went ahead and designed a building that was being built anyway, but a war in North Africa ended it, in Chad, right?
That was, I got to travel a lot.
Wow.
No, it was very interesting because when we were studying architecture, should I mention years, late 70s, early 80s in Paris, we would call that sustainable today. And so I was seeing somebody at the time who was doing ranching in Chad, which Mr. Trump has just put on the ban, no immigration from that country that no one's even heard of. But anyway, so I got to design and it would be called sustainable today. And then unfortunately there was an invading army. And it's a very sad thing. There was a French engineer who was in charge of the project, and his wife got killed by a stray bullet. It was awful. So we had to jump on a plane and get the hell out of there.
Keep a safe distance.
Well, yeah. But, it's so eye-opening to travel. And one of the things I think is missing a little bit is the curiosity for other countries and for
missing
Americans.
Where?
Well, just in our discourse, in our
You
media.
mean in the United States?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, yeah. You've traveled. I know you've been.
Well, I lived in Israel. I've spent a lot of time in Brazil. and
Yes.
traveled a bit.
I think that adventure of not being in control of every minute. You know, I have somebody in my family had a chance to go to Shanghai. And I said, "Hey, fabulous." He was like 17, go. He said, "No, why should I go? I can Google it." No, it's not the same thing. Not the same thing. I love not being in control when I'm traveling. You have to adapt to stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Super.
so there's my first little sermon of the day.
So let's tie in the traveling with politics, values, and yoga. And why yoga? Okay. So one of the reasons why, or there are a lot of different reasons why all of a sudden one day I decided I'm going to run for a public office. And then why I decided it's going to be United States Congress. And one of the pieces of the puzzle was a trip I took this summer with my daughter to the Martin Luther King National Historic Site in Atlanta. And it's a fabulous place. If anybody gets a chance
I've
to
heard
go
good
there,
things
very
about it, too.
moving,
Yeah.
great education, and what an inspiration and a great example. And you read so much about him. You see his personal items, including like his copy of Gandhi's book. They have things from Gandhi there. In fact, one of the rooms at the Martin Luther King National Historic Site, and it's not a big building, so obviously they're showing how big Mahatma Gandhi figured into Martin Luther King's thinking and his inspiration.
Pacifism.
One of the rooms is a Gandhi room. Gandhi's and Martin Luther King, the reason why he pursued nonviolence in politics was because of his inspiration from Gandhi. Now back to yoga. Where do you think his values came from? This nonviolence. The system of yoga goes about 2,000 years back, a little less, I think. Or yeah, 400 AD, where it was written by a guy named Patanjali.
George, do you do yoga?
George Patanjali. He
don't.
has once in a while.
What, yoga? Yeah, absolutely.
But you'd
And
be
not
surprised.
as much like
We
anything
all
else,
here.
like eating healthy, not as much as I ought to. But yeah, I'm a big believer in yoga.
Okay.
And I have encouraged other people to take up yoga when I hear them complain about one thing or another, because it is good for so many things, not just one thing. It's also good for the other things too.
Well, it's good for letting go of negative thinking, beating yourself up, judging yourself, judging other people, worrying. Certainly, it's good for.
I'm all
When I
in
hear
favor.
someone complain about, especially as they're getting older, that this hurts, whatever, like you're not moving. The reason that
course.
you're creaky when you get old is because you're not working that.
We're
that
very
muscle, that
sedentary.
Creaking is not my old body; it's the chair here right now.
Right, absolutely. We didn't
It's a WD-40.
it's not
For
handy.
you-
I'm not going to oil your chair
For
right
you
now.
or for the chair?
Well, Stuart isn't creaky because he does yoga.
Well, no, I still creak a lot during yoga classes, popping, and there's no way around that. But the system of yoga that is taught widely is called Raja Yoga. Back to the writings of this guy Patanjali. Yoga actually just means, and the first time it was mentioned was in the Bhagavad Gita, so it does have a history in a Hindu tradition. But the way that it was used was living in accordance with your true nature. Being true to yourself, fulfilling your destiny. And then these guys who tried to put it into practice, who we'd now call yogis, and they went out and they thought about it, they tried to put it into practice, and this guy Patanjali codified it, in a sense, as to how to calm the fluctuations of the mind, how to not feel like you're disconnected with your values, from your body, from your emotions, that your mind isn't always what the Buddhists call monkey mind chatter. And so it's a system that's not only about sitting up tall and stretching and bending, but as we all know, breathing exercises and meditation and concentration. So there's 8 of these.
This is a
different
big part
things.
of your. Is this part of your campaign? A lot.
Well, we'll get to it. It kind of is, and you'll find out why. The first 2 of the system of the yoga are ethics. They're the things to refrain from doing and things to pursue doing. The very first thing is ahimsa, avoiding harming others, harming people, harming animals, harming the planet. And that's where Gandhi's foundation came from the Hindu and yoga background of not harming, not causing violence. And this was Martin Luther King's inspiration. There were other people who were involved in the struggle for civil rights, equal rights, for justice, and but they thought that his commitment to nonviolence was
losing time,
losing time,
Yeah.
or set up for failure. It wasn't fast enough. But he thought, no, there's no way we're gonna come out ahead if you pursue the same sort of hateful tactics that other people pursue.
It's kind of sad that reverend peacefulness that he did express, Martin Luther King, is not expressed by all reverends today.
Well, I don't know. I don't spend much time in churches.
But they certainly have an influence. I was raised Protestant. My people are from the South, but I think that there is a great deal of double standards and hypocrisy in what they're doing today. And I just because you were wearing a silky, shiny robe and you call yourself a reverend, I'm not sure that I owe you infinite admiration and bowing down. Mm-hmm. So,
but
Martin Luther King was one example, but there are other examples who I do not revere.
Well, I'm focusing on Martin Luther King, who made such a big impact in our country that he has a National Historic site where he was born and where he preached, and he has a monument on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So he made a very big impact
People admire
on the
him
country,
around the world.
And now he's made a big impact on me. I mean, I always identified with him. We were born on the same birthday, and my mother says when I was born, I came out and said, "Free at last," and I have had many influences in my life, people who I like to read and inspire me, like John Muir and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the guy who wrote The Little Prince, and Martin Luther King was always an inspiration for me, but now more than ever. Because you look at politics and even if it's your party, even if you agree, if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat and you agree with what your party is saying and you agree that what the other party is doing wrong, you may not agree with the way the message is delivered by your representatives because it's so negative. They're always bashing and finger pointing and turning against the other person. And I think Martin Luther King would say you can't fight hate with hate, only love can conquer hate. So he wouldn't be involved in demeaning other people. His strategy was to look at the issue and try to treat your enemies fairly.
What about analytical thinking?
Well, that's how I would let my so I'm running for a seat as an independent so that I can be clear to people. It doesn't matter what party you're in. If I'm the representative of this congressional district in Washington, D.C., I'm your representative. I may not necessarily agree with you, but I'm going to keep an open mind, an open heart, and hear you out. And I think that my training and skills as a mediator helps me to listen to people and try to find common grounds. But you're saying, what about facts? So I would let people know I'm a lawyer by profession and education, and before that I studied environmental sciences and I was a pollution inspector. So I have a background in law and science. So my decisions will be based on facts or that's supported by evidence. I'm not going to be swayed by people saying, "Oh, well, so many people feel this way. You got to do what the people." Okay, you got to do what the polling tells you are telling you to do, or because I'm yelling really loud at you, you better take me seriously. I'll let people know that, hey, I might shut down if somebody's yelling at me or threatening me. So if you want to have a productive conversation and for me to be helpful, we're going to be civil and respectful to each other, and then back to values. So my decisions will be based on facts that are supported by evidence and certain values, like not harming people, not hurting people, avoiding harm.
But that stays a little general in my mind, Stuart. Let me get back to the current times. I mean, we should talk about current times. So, because I actually would take a rather different tack from you. I'm not running for anything, but when I look at, for instance, all the news is only dedicated to one individual right now because he's really good for ratings. President number 45. I think we should be looking at people who are not standing up to him. An example would be Marco Rubio when he did that executive order 10 days ago where women now, if your employer decides they're a Seventh-day Adventist and they shouldn't have to pay for your family planning or your contraception. Really? I mean, I would point the flashlight at Marco Rubio. You say don't be aggressive or anything, but I would say, are you kidding me? Your niece isn't using family planning. The women in your family, you're a big hypocrite. So I think we have to turn the camera away from the only person who's getting attention now. Turn the camera on these people who I consider collaborators. They are complacent with this jerk, and it is harmful. So you're saying we do no harm. They're doing harm. And if you're a collaborator with them, then you're doing harm. And it's huge hypocrisy to say, I don't think the woman's employer shouldn't have to, her health coverage shouldn't cover contraception because it's against my religious values. Give me a break. People in Marco Rubio's family, women in his family, are using contraception. He should stand up to that. So that's where I would be looking for analytical thinking and getting off just 24/7 coverage of one person these days. Let's look at what our elected people are not doing and what they're not daring to stand up for.
Well, as a representative, I would be listening to people like you as to what you think their congressperson should be doing. And certainly there are a lot of national federal programs and issues that have a local impact. And so my focus will be on things that are national, because it's federal law, federal agencies, but a local impact. Transportation safety, environmental issues, sea level rise, reduction in violence, and like you're talking about, healthcare and access to healthcare for all people.
And hypocrisy.
There's certainly, I certainly agree with you how important access to healthcare is to a country, for just people to feel secure in their family and their persons. It's good for businesses that the businesses have their employees will be healthy and taken care of. And if you look at countries that have health care available to all of their people, none of them are looking to drop that system and adopt a private
Let me say, I lived in France and I had single payer. I would switch back in a second. Oh my God!
But I think
it's tragic.
Clotilde,
it's a racket here.
That I could be an advocate for the people in my district, and to advocate for the importance of making health care affordable and accessible to everyone, without attacking other people who have views different than mine. Sure, I agree that if someone is trying to take away health care from a big part of the country, or even from any particular individuals, that they're doing harm. They're doing harm if they put up obstacles to health care. And so I want to be somebody who helps to fight for health care. But I don't think the fight means that it has to be like finger pointing and talking about how the other person is bad and they're wrong, because that's what has polarized society. That now people, they break relationships with family and friends because of different political views.
Oh, it's
I
very
think
tense.
a lot of people, like I said, I think a few minutes ago, they might agree with their party's policy preferences, but they might not necessarily like the way that those messages are delivered and advocated, because it tears people apart. It tears communities apart by demonizing other people. I think it's called the United States, so unity is even in the name of the country to begin with. And if you look at the preamble for the Constitution, which is like a statement of purpose why we set up the country, we the people in order to form a more perfect union. The very first value, to form a more perfect union. And I think that politics now is making it what's the word? Disunified, disjointed.
Disunification, separation. Well, I mean, I think there is a spectrum there somewhere between being a total collaborator and caving into somebody and then demonizing. I think somewhere in the middle and is, basically analytical thinking and explaining to people why they're being conned. And
why when I was talking about independent and non-adversarial, you hear collaborating and non-adversarial.
No. I said there's a spectrum.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying, I just mentioned Marco Rubio or all the people who didn't stand up to the president on this ridiculous hypocrisy of depriving women of health care for contraception based on your employer's religious beliefs. They should have stood up to him for that. Those are the collaborators. I didn't say you were the collaborator.
And that's another reason why I'm decided to run as an independent, even though I have been a registered Democrat ever since I was in high school at North Miami Beach Senior High and registered to vote when I turned 18.
No, what I'm saying is between collaboration and demonizing, there should be ground for parsing things, explaining to people why this is actually bad for you and why you would do better if you would open your mind to an alternative. So
I got there. I'm already ready to move on to the something, because you were saying that about Rubio. You mentioned that you feel that he should have stood up to his party, and so that's why I decided to run as an independent, because it seems like people in a party. They owe their party some loyalty. The party does a lot of fundraising and marketing for them, and there is a party platform. I don't want to owe a party anything. I don't want to owe anybody anything except for the voters in this congressional district. So I want to meet as many as I can and listen to them and really respect what they have to say. Not to agree with what everybody says, but really to keep an open mind and to look into it and to be able to explain people.
Could you explain stuff to them?
Well, I think that we're all teachers to each other. If we're authentic with somebody, we listen and we're speaking from our knowledge and experience and from our heart. I think that we do teach each other all the time.
Good. So I think there has to be, a concrete content in your message, and I know you're not just about kumbaya and feel good and all that stuff. You're going to eventually say, guess what? The healthcare thing, there are better ways of doing it. There are alternatives that are actually working out better in other countries. It's costing them less and more people are having access to it. And you've kind of been pulled into this binary way of looking at things. It's socialism, nonsense, or it's let the market, and the market always resolves everything perfectly, which it doesn't. So, I think there's a spectrum, and I think you're smart enough to not demonize and not collaborate, but to teach people, think about it. You haven't been given a very honest story so far. And there are other alternatives that are working quite well in other countries, not perfectly, but I from my own experience, oh my God, in 1 second I would switch back to single payer from my experience in France.
When I lived in Israel, the Kupat Cholim there, you just show up, and I was an American, and they don't care. You just, we treat you and have a nice day.
And there's transparency, because here there's no transparency. If you fall down and break your ankle in Oklahoma, or you have to go to an X-ray in Westchester County, you don't have any idea what it's going to end up costing you. You'll find out 4 months later. It's totally opaque, and that's really suspect. When I was living over there, they were way ahead of us. All of your information, if you had a little accent and you were traveling outside of where you live, they could find all your stuff, your blood type, all those things that you spend hours filling out here. And it would be the same price if you're going to have an X-ray there as if you're going to have X-ray there. And so it's not opaque. It's much more transparent. You're not constantly engaged in these kind of, I'm talking to some lawyer, I'm sending, registered letters back to Blue Cross Blue Shield because they're denying me something ridiculous. You're in an adversarial situation here, which is totally unfair. And with what they're trying to do now, all of those poor people who've just been thrown on the rails, they're going to find themselves in an adversarial situation when they need something. It's tragic. I don't see how you can have ethics and con people about a moment that's going to be very painful and scary when they're maybe in having a health problem, or their mother's very sick or something, and all of a sudden you're in this adversarial situation with lawyers telling you, you didn't read page 14B. You didn't read that clause
of your policy.
Yes.
There's an exclusion. There's a limitation.
Seriously.
No, but you know that the other side of the argument is, well, we can't afford to cover everybody. People have to pay for themselves, and the countries that have free public health care for everybody, they're not nearly as big as we are, or they're wealthier than we are.
It's not free.
Or what
It's
I
not
just
free.
thought, of course, because it comes from taxes. It's paid by the public.
Well,
and
there's a scale. If you want a much better system, and this was the system over there, I mean, there's just a baseline coverage for people. So, you're not going to get rejected and told, I'm sorry, we're not going to set your leg today because we don't have your papers. But if you want to pay more, then, of course, you buy a supplement, and then you have a very nice clinic, and you have a private room and the whole thing.
Right. Like I know in countries, when I was in Brazil, for example, they have a public health care system, but still people will have private health plans to supplement the public system.
Yeah. It's not excluding anybody. It's just at least you're sort of covering baseline for people. You're not going to, I remember listening, it was on C-SPAN when they were presenting Obamacare, and Scalia was still in the court, and you can't see the images on C-SPAN, but you hear the back and forth with the attorneys and the Supreme Court. And the attorney said, well, when people show up at the emergency room, we don't kick them out.
Right.
And Scalia said, why don't we?
Okay, let's stop there for a second. Let's stop there for a second.
I think you think
because I want to talk about that. Okay. Because I was going to say that it's not only a question of fairness to the people and that it's a matter of good public policy for people to be healthy, for families, for businesses, but also that if there's health care available to everybody, then people don't show up uninsured to the emergency room for every time their kid gets a strep throat, because that was, I think, one of the main arguments why we revamped the healthcare system and went into the Affordable Health Care Act, because it just wasn't feasible. The hospitals were going bankrupt from not having their bills paid. Mm-hmm. Now they have people coming in with insurance because there aren't as many uninsured people. But how to turn somebody away from an emergency room? Did he say that was for an emergency too, or just for like non-emergency services?
Maybe he was just asking a hypothetical question, And the legal, he was like challenged the other guy to say, well, why should we take everybody who shows up? And I always think this is where sometimes people fall short. They should have said, no, you're right, Your Honor. We should just, or justice, whatever it is. Let's just leave people in the gutter hemorrhaging. That's a great scenario.
We used to.
I mean, sometimes
right.
you have to follow up with a concrete image. When Trump said we're going to kick out all the dreamers, I would follow up with a question. Okay, so they're going to show up and knock on the door, and they're going to say you have 3 hours to get your suitcase together, and there's a bus that's coming to come and get you and family. Or just show us the scenario of how well this is going to work out. You follow up with a visual scenario of your ridiculous plan, and that's where you should sometimes try to nail these people. And you don't want to be confrontational, but I
didn't say I don't want to be confrontational. I don't want to be a finger pointer. I certainly will call somebody to task if their information they're providing is false, and so their decisions are based on false information or not necessarily correct values. And so let's go back to values again. And we said we were going to talk about yoga values, but let's talk about American values too, which I think are yoga values, because when you look to the Constitution, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, why did we form the Constitution? Why did we start the country? To establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility,
rule of law,
provide for the, no, that's not in the preamble, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. So taking care of the people in your community, uniting your community, keeping it a tranquil community. These are American values. Mm-hmm. And if you're not living up to your values, if you're saying one thing and you're doing another, that's means lack of integrity. Integrity is when your actions matches your words. Mm-hmm. And our Constitution has certain values, and if we're not upholding that, then as a nation, as a government, mm-hmm. we're lacking in integrity. So I'd like to see there more integrity, that we're following American values of trying to unite the society and the states to try to provide for the general welfare. It's the things that I think that are sort of overlooked now. And in fact, in the law, and I learned in law school too in my constitutional law class, that the preamble is not necessarily used in court as legal arguments. Like, okay, the government's action is unconstitutional because it doesn't uphold one of these stated values.
Right. It violates an amendment is what I always hear.
They'll talk about the actual clauses in the Constitution or the amendments, and the amendments are all interpreted in case law. Everything's interpreted, but I don't know if there's much interpretation of the preamble and how that affects law, because I think there are a lot of times that government actions have nothing to do with what the stated purposes of the Constitution are. The stated purposes are that what's in the preamble. That's why the Constitution was adopted, in order to fulfill and advance those values.
But then you get into
Unity,
the details later of the amendments.
Tranquility, defense, general welfare. And I may have missed one there because I was given the Cliff Notes version.
No, but I do think that this interpretation thing, I mean, it's always the same thing with Scripture, too. You know, you have the same Scripture, and then you have like 75 different ways to live it and preach it and so forth. I think what you're saying is lovely, but I look around and I hear people who consider themselves upholding the American values, and they will tell you it's almost like a sacred right to buy any kind of gun they want. And they are very fervent and very sincere and very emotional in their way of being Americans. So for me, it's more, I like that Enlightenment to rule of law transition that we made from, when we kicked the British out. That's what I like about us, and I think rule of law should prevail over all the emotional and sectarian and
I'm
religious.
glad you used that word, enlighten, and because it's true that these were
18th
people,
century Europe,
and they brought enlightenment or enlightening ways of thinking into developing a new form of government. And I think that, but in order to go forward, you can't always look in the rearview mirror. You have to drive forward, and to get where you're going, you got to look ahead. So I don't think that the Constitution can be thought of as like a dead document, and
Absolutely.
we have to interpret everything as if the original founders were sitting here with us today and tell us what they thought. Okay, certain words had meanings for like the originalist, like Scalia.
Yes.
He looks like the when you're talking about the gun debates, that in the Heller opinion, where they were considering what does a well-regulated militia mean? Well, in the common understanding today, you'd think a well-regulated militia means an organization of people for the defense of a country, and they're well-regulated, because the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so that's why there have been arguments, which is my argument too, that, okay, well, you can't infringe on people's rights to bear arms, but they ought to be in a well-regulated militia, where people could get together maybe a couple times a year, so that the militia knows what kind of weapons they have, what bullets they have, or how much ammunition they have, to train people and make sure they have gun safety, and they're keeping their guns in safe places, and to organize people really for the security of the free state, that when there are terror events or public safety emergencies, that we have this organized militia ready for people who are concealed gun owners to be trained to respond and be organized. But back to the originalist interpretations, they say, and I don't know, I'm not no scholar on arcane ways of thinking, and I don't know that any jurist can say, I know what was in the heads back then, but they say no, well-regulated means that they had good guns, and militia was anybody over the age of 15 or 18, what it was then. But sure, now it's broader, because we say every American has the right to bear arms, but then it was only men. It wasn't African Americans. It was only white Americans. So sure, there was a broadening of what the militia
the idea of
is.
citizenship has evolved. I think there were times where you had to be a property owner to vote. You had to be a white male property owner to vote.
Over 21.
And over 21. So, I mean, clearly, with time, it's like history, it's like science. We do not have one piece of knowledge that is carved into marble for eternity. Science, I think it's sad, that some people are arguing against teaching evolution in schools. No, of course, science is evolving. Our knowledge is evolving. Our knowledge of climate change is evolving. We should have acknowledged the science 20 years ago when it began to. That's why I think of you every time I go down Collins Avenue, Stuart. Let me just say, here's a plug for Stuart. I would vote for you for two reasons, and I haven't even looked at your platform.
No, you're not in my district.
And I'm not in your district. Okay, first was you were way ahead of the trend on that environmental thing that you were involved in. I didn't even know you then. I just heard about some guy named Stuart Reed who was trying to do this progressive, rather visionary thing along Indian Creek.
Greenway.
Okay.
Recreational
but that
trail,
was
environmental.
That was new then, environmental stuff. We weren't thinking about it. So what if we had taken leadership on that 20 years ago when this science began to trickle down to all of us? It's really too bad we missed that opportunity as a country to take that leadership. The other thing I think of you is, this is another thing he did, I think pro bono. I don't think you were getting paid for this. These are the two reasons I vote for you. Then there was a whole thing around South Point it's the tip of Miami Beach.
Yeah, preserving the public easement for the walkway, the waterfront walkway.
Because the people who own the condos there said, no, absolutely, we won't let the public come down here. They have no right to be here. And so Stuart Reed and another guy I know, who's also an attorney, you started scrounging around and you dug up the documents and said, guess what? The public has a right to come down here. And
actually,
here we are today.
Jill, what was his name, who came to the breakfast club, Tuesday morning breakfast club, he brought me a stack of papers like this to my office. He went to the Dade County Planning Office,
he found
which I think
it.
is
So he
out
deserves some credit.
Well, he brought me the stack of papers, and I went through it, and I looked at the deed from the Alaskan Indian tribe.
Right.
It's funny, it was called the Alaskan parcel because the federal government settled a lawsuit with the Alaskan Indian tribe by giving them land in Miami Beach, and they sold it, but there was a deed restriction that there had to be a public easement for a walkway along government cuts. So now that if the landowner had been permitted to build as they wanted to at that time,
and to privatize,
there would have been a walkway along government cut at South Point Park, and then around the marina, but they wouldn't have been connected along the water. But now it's a continuous walkway.
It's an amazingly pleasant, successful thing today. You're out of the cars. People are pushing baby strollers. You have this fabulous diversity. You get Orthodox Jewish couples who come sit down, and then you got the Chinese showing up from wherever, and then you've got the girls on the rollerblades and basically bikinis. I mean, it's a funny mix of people down there, and it is so pleasant. It is a huge success.
Not only that, but you can in the water there. I've seen dolphins. I've seen manatees. You see stingrays jumping out of the water.
They did a beautiful job of landscaping. I was on the DRB when we approved that. They did a gorgeous job of naturally, it sort of eases down into the dunes. It's a beautiful.
Oh, you didn't mention that you've been a board member of the Miami Design Preservation League.
That was a little, yes.
And you recommended me to become a board member, and I'm there now.
Yes.
So thank you.
Well, I think thank you, because you also did something else for us. It was. You did an amazing job standing up to $700 an hour lawyers, and you basically beat them in an argument, which was kind of cool. So those are the three reasons I vote for the guy, but I'm not registered here.
Well, and I don't live in South Beach anymore, but I do when I go there. I like to bring my bicycle and go around South Point and then go up.
Aren't you happy with it?
And then they didn't build the Indian Creek Greenway, but from that time they just built the Ocean Walk, which follows along the dunes.
Yes.
Because there was already public ownership or management. The issue with the Indian Creek Greenway is that the buildings on the east side of Collins Avenue and Indian Creek Drive are the ones that own the narrow strip of land along the Indian Creek waterway, and so the local government would need to get easements or land deeded over to build it. But there it was already ready. But now the Indian Creek Greenway, I read that they're starting a little piece of it along Lake Pancos, which is about the 20-something street, because of seawalls being crumbling and needing to be rebuilt.
Oh my God, they're
and
having to build
protecting
up all the time against
the
because we're
raising-
having tides and flooding.
Well, everybody's worried about climate change, as we should be, because there are so many variables. But as far as can we continue to live in coastal communities, I would think maybe not, for eternity, but I think certainly for at least our grandchildren and beyond that, because Miami Beach was underwater when it was first built. They had to fill in order to make it dry. Just about every
Bay
coastal
Harbor Island
community,
was mangroves.
Boston, New York, they all have marshy areas, and so it's fill to raise to make dry, and that's what's going to happen. It's already happening.
But we
They're
have to
raising
design
the street
for it.
levels. It's got to plan. I think that a great profession for children, if you have to point them for the future, landscape architecture and civil engineering in order to deal with rising waters and flood control.
But I also I attended a really interesting seminar at the Wolfsonian last year, and they invited people from Haiti and then this architect from Puerto Rico, and he made a big impression on me. Of course, this is way before they got hit by the hurricanes recently, and he was showing us really resilient. It kind of reminds me of the stuff I was studying. We would call it sustainable today or resilient, and so it's not just speculation, bling architecture. It is architecture that
built
is
to survive.
Built to survive, and the stuff he was showing us was really cool. And it would be made to, if there is a big, huge flood inundation like a tsunami,
Everything goes under.
It goes under. You remove stuff up. Then the waters recede, and you still have your building. So I think it's going to be a very interesting opportunity for architects and engineers to start looking at much more interesting stuff than, I'm sorry, these spec empty condo towers we're looking at with no lights on in them, where people are just parking. These poor... Listen, I have an idea. Here's an idea, Stuart, for your campaign. I really feel sorry for the billionaires because they don't know what to do with their money. They don't have anything interesting to do with their money. What can we do to help them? There's interesting stuff they should do. And I think that just buying, I heard them once they were going to put up a 50-story tower at the entrance to Miami Beach. And all the neighbors came out saying, no, we won't be able to park and it'll be congested. And literally, I love this. It's so funny. The developer's argument to them was, no, don't worry. There'll never be anybody there. So you are looking at empty 40 stories of portfolio.
Like the Beatles song, For No One.
So I think we have to help those poor billionaires find more interesting stuff to do with their money. And I think that should be what you progressives and us Democrats should be doing, is looking for ways to get them to bring their tax money back to the country. They won't be making as much as they would like to make in a totally speculative world, but they would get much better public relations. People are beginning to sort of resent Facebook and Google and these very powerful entities. They're not paying taxes. They're all offshore. If you were to make a deal, a quid pro quo with them, you bring some of that back, you start hiring people, you start doing interesting projects, infrastructure, rehabilitating buildings. Not just charity.
Well, here's the thing.
You could make like a new deal, and that could bring a consensus in this country. It's not a government handout.
Well, thank you for the suggestion for the campaign, but I don't think I know any billionaires. I don't think I ever met one.
No.
However, I'll bet, and I'm just because of how I know people, that I think billionaires, in a way, are kind of like the rest of us in that some have good values, some don't have good values, but because of the money that they have much bigger influence in people's lives, on their employees, on the economy, on communities.
But why not invest in interesting
stuff? So sort of
stuff?
like how a person can be a blessing to their family or a curse. It's how big is your sphere of influence. So I think billionaires, what motivates them and what do they want? I think that they're a mixed bag like the rest of us. It's just that they make bigger wakes than the rest of us.
Well, I'm not one of the Bernie people that is just foaming at the mouth and pointing at the 1%. I think the 1%, with a little bit of nudging and a little bit of policy oversight, could actually get a much better profile, public relations profile. They would be appreciated if they were to bring back some of the money, begin to pay taxes. I'm talking about the corporations. I'm not now even talking about the individuals. And they should make a deal with them. You could dedicate the next 10 or 15 years to making our country modern. with some of the money that they bring back. It's
We're not a
gun-
modern country?
We're not. Travel.
Tell me about it. I
Travel.
have, yeah.
Travel.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Like people, I go
Oh,
to
my
Brazil
God.
and they think it's like a third world country, but you go there and they're just like us. The airport, the subway, the style of living, the places where people go shopping. It's just like America, but I like their music a lot.
Oh, I was going to say, you do yoga, I do Zumba. That's my mindfulness. No, I'm sorry to tell you, I go to New York a lot, and I can compare the public transportation, the trains, and the subways in New York with places I've
Anywhere.
gone for business, like to Tokyo or France or Germany or even Portugal, for Christ's sake. Excuse me. They got money from the European Union, but oh my God, it's like you're in the 21st century and you've come back. I remember once flying back from Tokyo and I got into an American train and the person came on the loudspeaker saying, "We're sorry, we can't do anything about the air conditioning today. Oh, the toilets aren't working. We're sorry. Please try not to flush or we'll be in New York in 3 hours." And then the train made this sound. It was like being in a 1940s movie. This was so shocking to me. And I see tourists show up down here in South Florida. They're standing at a bus stop. They look
No
totally
shade.
puzzled.
Okay.
Where the hell are we? When is it coming? Where does it go? I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be negative.
Do you
I'm
think
just saying, why
South Florida,
not spend
before
some
you go
time?
off, because you touched on something I want you to talk
Okay.
more about. Where you're
Okay.
talking about people standing at a bus stop,
Yeah.
looking very uncomfortable, and do you think that because places that have great public transportation systems are so blessed by it, they work for them. They really
God.
people could get around and
Less
not worry
traffic
about.
congestion.
Do you think it would work to really have an aggressive public transportation infrastructure update in South Florida?
Of course.
Broward County,
Oh.
because that's what I'm thinking of
Good.
as a congressperson, that I would like to bring more federal dollars for developing things that are known as bus rapid transit. It's
Yes,
like an
absolutely.
alternative. It's an alternative
You have
to
dedicated
street.
lanes.
We spoke about it when I was running for Miami Beach Commission, because then the big issue was people, and it's still an issue now,
Yeah.
that they want to bring a rail line into South Beach
Very costly.
from Miami, and they'd have to dig up the roads, and then the sea level rises and the trains aren't going
And
to
the
go as fixed.
maintenance,
But for a fraction of the cost,
Absolutely.
a fraction of the disruptions, more flexibility. If there's problem with the streets, you could have something called bus rapid transit,
Yes.
where
Stuart,
it mimics.
I'm
high
writing
five.
you a
Is that what
check.
you're going to do? Huh?
I'm writing you a check.
Thank you.
Hey,
I love
will that be your
Clotilde.
first campaign contribution?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Right, because I set up something on GoFundMe, or a political version
Okay.
of GoFundMe, and already a couple of friends
Excellent.
donated.
Oh, honey, if it were only, I like some of your other ideas. If it were only for this, I mean, for heaven's sake, I'm sorry, it's such a con job what they're trying to do with the rail system, because it is locked in. It's incredibly expensive. There will be maintenance problems because we are sitting on like soft, porous stuff, and there's going to, with the sea level and stuff, it's just going to be constant maintenance. There is, if it turns out the route wasn't exactly what you intended, this is much more flexible. You can have all these little tentacles going out to where you actually get somewhere. All those people who work in the service industry, in hotels, in the hospitals, how the hell do they get
benefits
there?
a community when people
How
could
do
get
they
around
get
and get
there?
to their job, that businesses won't have people with excuses why they're late to work or they miss work. Yeah, and bus rapid transit, it mimics like a train system, in that before you load on the bus, you pay a toll to like go through a turnstile to go onto a platform, and then the platform is level with the bus, so people don't have to walk on stairs. The doors open up and they're wide like on a subway bus, and so people on the bus flat platform, they just walk on. The doors close, it takes off, and then the bus has like a Wi-Fi connection with the traffic signals, so that then when the bus approaches,
It says that
turns
you are
green.
you're
Rapid
arriving at your
transit.
destination in 3 minutes. Stuart, I hate to say, I mean, I take the bus here because I want to support public transportation. I take it from my Zumba class to get home. I rush up there and Lyft. I'm only taking Lyft drivers now because when I'm late, like I to get here this morning. That's another story. Brilliant people coming to this country from Venezuela driving cars for Lyft. I could do 15 interviews with these people. They're such remarkable stories.
There are a lot of shows out there.
Honey, it would break your heart.
If you would join Facebook like all your other friends do, you would see all these videos on YouTube, like, cabbie talk, and they sing to strangers.
But if they give me their background and having been kidnapped and
hey,
stuff
Daniel
like that.
Seraldo, the director of the Miami Design Preservation League, can we convert her to become a Facebook user so that I don't have to once in a while?
You have to convert me to a facelift first. Okay, let me just say. So I'm taking the public bus. And it's so archaic. I'm embarrassed. These people they get on and they have to shove an old rumpled $1 bill into the slot.
And everybody's going to wait.
Are you kidding?
It's holding the bus.
We're standing there for 8 minutes and the bus driver's saying, "I'm sorry, you have to try to push it back in again." I mean, no one is doing this. So I'm just saying, I think were we to look for something that would create a consensus, you literally could modernize the country if you were to get Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon to pay their taxes, not pay as much as we're trying to gouge out of them now. Bring back the money, invest the money, and start doing modernization projects. That could take up 10 or 15 years and hire people. And that would be good for us. And it would
when
be
we're
good
talking
for
about
them.
common values, too, we all value being safe and not getting killed and hurt, but the roads are probably the most dangerous aspects of our day-to-day lives. Where all these arguments in politics about potential war and diseases or threats from immigration, but really every day you hop in a car, you're risking your life, and probably more people that you've known in your life who've come to an early death or debilitating injuries is because of traffic accidents. So I think that a congressperson ought to be highlighting the fact that the roads need to be modernized for public safety, and we could use smart technologies like bus rapid transit, like smart self-driving cars, perhaps in some places. No, it's because the most dangerous part of driving nowadays are the crazy people who don't follow the rules, and they're putting everybody. You see it when you're on I-95. It's like NASCAR. Some people going past. So I think that a common value is to protect everybody and their children and their families and their friends by making the road safer.
I would be a little hesitant on the self-driving cars because the front page of the cover of the last edition of The Economist magazine, which is a brilliant magazine, it says why computers will never be safe. And so already...
Because they could be hacked or they have viruses.
Absolutely. If I wanted to bump off somebody, I just block the brakes, I mean, I'm so sorry. Look at the time you spend now redoing your passwords and going back and finding out somebody bumped into your...
I bet people could do it anyway without a self-driving car because your cars already have computer systems and computerized.
But in this point, you will be entirely dependent on the system working. So that's
one
one
thing.
In a
limited,
just
limited
to finish,
self-driving and limited, like maybe on certain roads. Certain roads have self-driving cars and others don't. I don't know. I don't pretend to be a transportation safety expert, but I know that the roads are not safe and that we could do a lot more to make them safer.
First of all, when I don't own a car anymore, when I'm driving up I-95, I look over and the person next to me is going 75 miles an hour and I see the light reflected on their face because they're looking at their damn phone. So that's crazy. But I do think it would be tragic also to put... I personally enjoy that exchange I have with my Lyft drivers. The guy took me up here today. I mean, I remember him. It was a cool time. Why are you going to put millions of people out of work and betting everything that computer will be totally safe for you in the car? I'm already seeing people dealing, as I say, with their passwords, with their passcodes, with their credit cards, with their stuff getting hacked, with their phones messed up and stuff like that. I'm wondering how sure that's going to be. You say just put the self-driving cars on certain itineraries.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, but I would wonder. You think it's
but
screwed
these
up
are the
watching
issues.
people looking at their phones? Wait till you start messing up with the computer screwing up on your car.
But these are issues I want to look into more deeply and with experts and on a community-wide level.
That's why
what
you invited
can we do?
me.
what can we do? Well, I invited you because I respect you
'Cause
and
I
I
have
like
opinions.
you, and you know me, and you knew me when I was a candidate many years ago, and you were able to talk about the Indian Creek Greenway and South Point,
South Point
and,
is cool.
and other things. So that the Greenway actually was from my background in transportation planning. I was never a transportation planner, so I don't want to say that I have a background in transportation planning. But when I was in law school, I remember reading an article that this what they called ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act,
I like that,
had been passed, where there were a substantial amount of public money available for public transportation improvements. And so I wrote a proposal to a Florida land use and environmental advocacy organization called Thousand Friends of Florida to do an internship with them, where I would help them to develop a strategy for Florida communities to get a fair share of ICE-T money for public transportation projects, which would include also bike lanes, pedestrian safety enhancements. So Miami Beach, how did I stumble across the
Indian Creek
national? Okay, so the National Park Service has a program called Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, where they help communities to design through a public what they call charrette process, where people are invited, and you remember in
bring
Indian
projects.
Creek we had the board set up where everybody would brainstorm and say what they wanted to have in the Indian Creek Greenway. Well,
That's a participation. That's nice.
There was what had happened was I was this young guy, new lawyer in Miami Beach, and I had the best dog, Poppy. Remember him?
Oh,
He was
I
the
do.
best, and he would run around off the leash in South Point Park with all his other dog friends until one day somebody in City Hall got the ear of their law enforcement, and they started ticketing dog owners in South Point. So the people who I knew there were asking about let's do a petition to have dog parks. So I assisted to prepare the petition, and I brought it to City Hall, and they said, why don't we have this new bond for improving public parks. Come to the meetings and talk about dog parks. And they heard it, and they did include the dog parks. But
It was very controversial.
I
There was
heard-
a lot of barking among
Nah,
the
the dog
owners.
parks-
Among the owners.
But I see we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to
But I have a lot
fast
more to
forward.
say.
That's okay. Just
Okay, we're
keep
almost
going. Just keep going. There's no.
Thank you, George. So parents were saying, well, there's no shade in the playgrounds. How are our kids
Yeah.
going to be there? And the parks director is saying, well, we don't have any money in our budget for the shade. But then I saw that they were replacing these tennis courts with these clay courts that have a reservoir of water underneath it, and like a toilet to keep the level constant, so they don't
tennis
have to flood.
court
The most
toilet.
expensive tennis courts. So they don't have. They had like hundreds of thousands of dollars for these state-of-the-art tennis courts, but no shade
No
for
one's
tot
playing
lots.
tennis.
And all the waterfront property in Miami Beach, they weren't doing any waterfront enhancements. And I had studied land use law in law school, and I read the city's comprehensive land use plan, and they had a requirement when they do any sort of public work on waterfront property to increase public access to waterfront properties, and they had no money for that. So I sued the Miami Beach government that their decision was inconsistent with their comprehensive land use plan, and
Would
it
you
was
come back and
dismissed.
sue them again today, please?
Well, here, you give me a good case. So
Where to start?
so the case was dismissed because their city attorney argued, and the judge agreed with them, that because I didn't live next to a park, that I wasn't
You didn't have standing.
affected. I
oh
wasn't
my God!
standing. I
Oh,
said,
that's so funny.
so I try to say, okay, I'll find them an offer they can't refuse. And I looked for a grant, and I found this National Park Service grant. Like, wow, we could have a waterfront recreational trail planned with the National Park Service help us. So I wrote a resolution. I brought it to Commissioner David Dermer, who later became the mayor, and he sponsored it. It passed. The city applied for that. I also made up a group called the Friends of Indian Creek and wrote to the National Park Service and said we support the city's application, and we were approved.
He's the Friends
And here
of
we
the
are.
Gandhi Indian Creek. That's his favorite thing.
Well, nowadays, sure. Yeah, yoga means unity. Yoga means getting connected. So you're trying to connect with your inner self. You're trying to.
I stopped doing yoga, but I had an Indian teacher who I liked a lot, and she would always say, wait, visualize the color purple. And then she would crack up because she knew she was being funny. I like that.
Yeah, but like I said, yoga means unity. It's not only practicing yoga where you're in a yoga studio, but there's something called karma yoga, which means doing good selfless deeds
And then
for other
there's
people.
Zumba.
So if you are a selfless deed giving person, you are practicing yoga. You're practicing karma yoga. What do you think of that? And so that anyway, the values of yoga: not harming, refraining from lying, refraining from stealing, being content and being grateful. So I'll leave it with those. Those are very powerful values.
Namaste.
Friendship is a big value too,
Listen.
which is why I'm so glad to be here with my friends.
Lots more to say. And I'm glad you're on the spectrum somewhere, not demonizing your opponents, but we will do some analytical thinking and tell them where they're wrong once in a while, like the collaborators.
Thank
The
you.
people who are not standing up to Trump today. I think we really got to focus because we're spending he's so good for ratings. One of the things I do for mindfulness, Stuart, one more second, you get your news from other sources and listen to news about the rest of the world. It is such a break. It is so beneficial to your mind and to your stress because the ratings are based on stressing you out all the time. Whether they're stressing you nonstop with Irma's coming, whether they're stressing you nonstop with Las Vegas, or whether they're stressing you nonstop with Donald's tweets of the day. So if you
Clotilde?
actually just take a break from that and look at world news and find other sources, it's really good for you. That's my mindfulness.
Okay, Clotilde, 2 points.
Yes.
So you said 1 second, so I guess you knew from the music that you hear that we're about to wrap it up. But back to why you should join Facebook. That's where you're going to get your international news. All my friends from when I lived in Israel, my friends from Brazil, my friends who live in England, I'm reading the articles that they're posting. Okay, so join Facebook so I could see you more often and you could get international
You can make a
news.
fake persona. They say
Yeah.
real people
No,
only.
no,
but
no,
yeah.
no. I want to read. I want to read real correspondents who speak the language and have been in the country for 20 years.
You'll get that too.
You get it all.
Clotilde,
It's
I
all on
love
there.
you. George, I love you.
I like disagreeing with
Thank
you.
you for coming here to Hollywood. I know it's hard to get you South Beach people across the bridge. So thanks for coming.
There are
and
good
join
reasons
me
to vote
the
for him.
first and second Mondays of each month here on SoFloRadio.com. Thank you, Clotilde and George.
Streaming live from the beautiful city of Hollywood, Florida, USA. This is SoFloRadio.com.